Red Matter 2. There was quite a buzz around this game in the VR community over the last couple of months because of graphics of all things. They promised to deliver the best looking Quest 2 game ever and everybody was like, wow, this is so impressive. And yes, the game looks fantastic, even on the Quest 2 that is. But that is mainly because of its incredible art direction. Still, making this run on the Quest was probably not an easy task. It is a bit of a shame that developers nowadays have to put in all this work to make their games run on hardware that is hardly adequate for its job, but that is a topic for another day. Pretty graphics alone don't make a good game, so it's a sequel to Vertical Robots' alternative universe Cold War puzzle adventure game any good? Well, there's quite a bit about the game to criticize, but overall yes, it's pretty good. Let's get into it. Slava, comrades. With the help of the Volgravian undercover agent Beda, you managed to escape the clutches of the Atlantic Union. During your escape, you intercepted a distress call from your comrade and best friend Stars. Determined to look for him, you embark on a journey across the solar system. While you set out to investigate the fate of your friend, you get to uncover the truth behind Volgravia's top secret research programs and get a closer understanding of the mysterious red matter. Hold on a second there. Volgravia? Atlantic Union? Agents? What the hell is this guy talking about? Well, Red Matter takes place in an alternative reality Cold War scenario. Imagine a future where mankind has conquered the stars and built outposts all over the solar system. But the world is divided into two factions that are not officially at war but always in conflict. There's Volgravia, which is modeled after the Soviet Union, and the Atlantic Union, which would be the NATO of this world. Red Matter 2 continues directly where the first part left off, this time exploring the secret Volgravian research projects from an insider's perspective. Similar to the first game, you are mainly an observer of past events, trying to figure out the fate of your friend amidst the conglomerate of crazy scientists, questionable research methods, sketchy government involvement and, of course, an alien organism. I enjoyed the story quite a bit, a lot more than the first game actually. The writing is more concise, more focused. It is at times more like a detective story, where you gather clues that keep you going towards a clear goal. The one thing that irked me is that the main characters are incredibly naive. These guys lived their entire lives surrounded by extremely militaristic propaganda in a constant state of Cold War and are somehow shocked that the government tries to use research for military purposes. The voice acting is solid, far better than in the first game where it was a bit hit and miss. There are two major voice characters, Agent Beda, who guides you through the whole game as a voice in your ear, and the main character himself. That was a bit of a gamble and is something that not everybody's going to like. It can create a disconnect between player and main character. I did not mind it too much, except in these situations where the main character is really stupid.
Interplanetary missiles. They've injected the warheads with red matter. Can you believe it?
Ah, shut the fuck up, dude. Oh, and all the evil Volgravians have a Russian accent, while all the good Volgravians speak perfect English. That was a bit on the nose.
Rest assured, Volgravia is deeply grateful for your sacrifice. Slava, comrade.
Red Matter 2 is a strictly linear adventure game. While the first part was mainly a puzzle game, the sequel incorporates other gameplay elements, namely stealth and combat. These mechanics are introduced over time and then shift the core gameplay. The game is thus divided into three phases, a pure puzzle phase, a stealth phase and a combat phase, each phase also incorporating the mechanics of the previous one, but less prominent. The stealth mechanics are rather simple, don't get caught by the lasers or bad things will happen. Sometimes you can move or create cover, which is a nice touch. There will be longer sequences of stealth sections without save points, so you will have to redo the whole thing when you make a mistake. At some point in the story you get a gun, which again shifts the focus of the game. There's only one gun in the game and two types of enemies. First, you get introduced to the combat drone alongside an explanation on how to kill it. You need to shoot off armor plates to get to the vulnerable parts and then shoot those. This actually sounds easier than it is, because you have to be pretty accurate with a gun that feels inherently imprecise. The best tactic for me was to play very aggressive and get right into their business. When you manage to hit your shots, they go down pretty quick. The enemies move around a lot, but they seem to have a finite number of positions available to them. They will rotate between 2 or 3 positions depending on the player's location. So they become pretty predictable when you observe them for a while. Later in the game you get introduced to the Oculus, Oculus, it's called the Oculus. At this point the combat drones are gone, the Oculus will be your foe for the remainder of the game. I actually enjoyed fighting the Oculus quite a bit. Combat is more fast paced, movement of the Oculus is more erratic and less predictable, but it is far easier to land your shots. There are several sections where they keep respawning until you disable a mechanism so you can't just turtle in. It can't hurt to have a bit of space in your play area to jump in and out of cover, but locomotion is pretty fast, so combat works good enough even when you play stationary. Though puzzles have moved a bit into the background compared to the first part, it is still the main focus of the game. Difficulty is again more on the easy side. This time there are some standardized mini puzzles strewn in, which do not add much to the experience. They are more like little distractions. This connecting paths by turning knobs thing is so overused and incredibly simplistic. Then there's this hacking minigame which comes down to changing the relative position of your controllers until you get close and hear a beeping sound. I did not enjoy that too much either. Then there are a couple of save combinations you need to find. Most of the time you will just find them lying around somewhere, but there's this one time where you need to extract it from a slideshow, and even after I knew the answer I could not figure out how one was supposed to get it. But that is a very rare exception, and there's a good chance I was just too blind to see it. Each area you uncover has one of these larger scale puzzles that span over multiple rooms and you need to solve to progress the story. The rail line forward is blocked, so you need to rotate the tracks to continue your journey. Go figure out a way to do that. These puzzles are pretty straightforward for the most part, though you always need to take a careful look at your surroundings. There's only one path, not only through the entire game but also in puzzle solving. If you have an alternative idea, chances are it will not work. Still, these puzzles are the meat and bone of the game. They are in general unique, well designed and integrated into the narrative. This is where the game is at its strongest. And now there are jumping puzzles, because jetpack. The game uses smooth movement as main locomotion, which is a pivot from the jump-based system of the predecessor. As a second option you have a jetpack, a very cheap model though, which only manages to give short bursts at a time and does for some strange reason only recharge when you are standing on the floor. Who designed something like that? But jetpacking is fun. It is quite the enjoyable and immersive method of locomotion and allows for the inclusion of the before mentioned jumping puzzles. I did not mind those at all. You do not have a rendered body, instead there's this little wireframe things where your feet are supposed to be that helps you gauge your actual heights in jumping sections. There's a crouch button that I did not like very much. When crouching you're way too close to the floor. It feels more like going prone, but movement is too smooth for that and you can turn around way too fast. What I would have liked to see is that when going prone, smooth movement to be deactivated and instead you need to pull yourself along the floor with your arms and maybe add a crouch for smooth movement a bit higher. I think that would have been a better solution. You interact with the world with two tools. On your right hand you have a grabber to grab stuff, and later in the game you get the option to switch it to your gun. In the left hand you mainly use your scanner to scan stuff, but you can turn it into a second grabber or a flashlight. Unlike the first game, the flashlight is actually useful and has this awesome feature to fire flares into dark areas. You use the main function of every tool with a trigger, including the grabber, so you pick stuff up with a trigger. This makes sense in the context of the game using this grabber tool, but I really don't understand the design idea behind this. Picking stuff up in VR feels so much better with a grip, especially on the Valve Index controllers, but also on the Oculus controllers really. I wish they would get rid of the grabber. Speaking of the knuckles, let us appreciate that they took the time to create a custom model for the Index controllers, considering that the vast majority of sales will probably be on the Quest. There's been a lot of bad blood between PCVR players and some developers lately because of a change of focus to the Quest platform in the last year or two. It is understandable, everybody needs to make money, especially as VR gaming is completely comprised of smaller indie studios which are always on a tight budget. But it led to PC players getting the shorter end of the straw on more than a few occasions. So the marketing for this game was completely focused on the Quest platform. Vertical Robot made sure to let PC players know they have not forgotten about them completely. If you are playing on the Index and are wondering how to get to the in-game menu, you need to use the menu button to open up the Steam VR overlay and then close it down again. This is how it is supposed to work, which is very strange. The developers have already acknowledged that this is not ideal and might patch it at some time. Until then, through the Steam VR overlay is the only way. They took some inspiration from Half-Life Alyx and incorporated a gravity glove thing to pick up stuff with a flick of your wrist, which can be handy at times. And a single storage slot at each of your wrists, which is very useful as the puzzle areas are quite a bit larger than the first game and you sometimes just need to carry stuff around with you. I will always keep my artificial eye with me, you never know when you need one. The game is very pretty, it is positively gorgeous at times. The whole discussion about the game's graphics in the past was reduced to technical aspects. The game does not look good because of technical features, it is in fact quite compromised in that regard. It looks good because of the incredible art direction. That should be the focal point of the discussion. Very early in the game you get hit with this platform above Saturn. Look at the swirling clouds in Saturn's atmosphere, the way you can see the individual rocks in orbit that blend together to form the rings in the distance. It's absolutely stunning. The captured footage really doesn't do it justice. You have to be here, see it for yourself. We gotta jump down. We have to, right? The interiors are mainly sparsely furnished and seem empty and sterile. This gives the game the cold and menacing atmosphere, but sometimes you get a glimpse out of the window. Lighting takes a big part of the visual spectacle the game is. Every area is lit up by a multitude of small light sources, which creates a very atmospheric mood, while always keeping it bright enough, except when it is supposed to be dark. Then it is really dark. There are a lot of reflective surfaces, like everywhere, which are not real reflections, right? They only reflect a very simplified version of the surroundings, but it works. It looks pretty good on both versions of the game. The PC version also has dynamic shadows, higher resolution textures, and always a maximum level of detail. Lighting is baked in most of the time, meaning that it's static and does not affect the player model, for example. It's not a big deal in general, but there are some areas where it is very obvious. The most impressive lighting effects are on transitions between different areas, when you get hit with this healthy dose of neon, but these are constrained to tiny rooms. Sometimes the walls have very simple collision boxes that do not match the geometry. This does not affect gameplay at all really, but players will notice and it pulls you out of immersion for a second or so. The payoff though is that it runs on the Quest at all and a really solid performance on PC. I played on a 2070 and got with maximum graphics settings up to 144 frames. Frame rate was pretty unstable though, but it never dipped below 60. If you play on the 3080 you can probably crank up the resolution scale quite a bit without too much of a performance hit. I was a bit nitpicky throughout this review, and I think there are parts of this game that are not very good. But I want to make absolutely clear that all these complaints I have are pretty minor. I enjoyed the game, in fact I enjoyed it a lot, and I do recommend to play it. Compared to the first part, nearly every aspect of the game is improved. Writing, visuals, gameplay, mechanics, locomotion, voice acting. You still only walk through uninhabited spaces, with the exception that now there are killer robots roaming about. As much as I would like to visit one of these places bustling with life and activity, Vertical Robot is a small studio. They have to scale their projects accordingly, and it is woven into the narratives that you always arrive after the catastrophe, when everybody is dead and gone. Except in the beginning of the game that is supposed to be on an active station, but there they dazzle the player with an overload of reflective surfaces to distract them from the lack of life. It took about 7 hours to complete, making Red Matter 2 about 3 times as long as the predecessor and probably one of the beefiest VR puzzle games on the market. If they keep up this pace we will have a full-fledged video game with Red Matter 4. If you haven't played the first part and want to check it out, I recommend to play that one first. You do not need it to understand the sequel, but Red Matter 2 will completely spoil the first game for you in its first few minutes. VR gaming is in a bit of a rough spot at the moment. Except Valve, there's not a single major player in the gaming industry that has made a successful attempt at a VR game. Maybe the PSVR 2 will change that, maybe. But for now we are stuck with smaller scale projects from smaller developers. For the indie scene that is also an opportunity. Vertical Robot have put themselves on the map with Red Matter 1 and now they have solidified their position as an essential VR developer. I'm curious to see where they go from here.
Slava, comrades, and glory to Volgravia.